You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 20th of June 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and a warm welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Emma Nelson, and coming up on today's programme, Canada lists Iran's Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist group. We'll examine why they've done this now and what difference it could make. Also ahead, we'll hear from the United Nations Deputy High Commissioner for Refugees, Clements, on how the private sector is helping them to build new lives for refugees. And we head to Sri Lanka for this week's Global Countdown. Who else to tell us about it other than Fernando Augusto Pacheco? Faye.
Hello, Em. I have indeed brilliant Sri Lankan songs for you. Expect plenty of romance.
Thank you, I shall. That's all coming up right here on The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. Canada has listed Iran's Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist group. Canadian citizens currently in Iran have been advised to leave, with the government saying that the move will help Ottawa counter terrorist financing. Well, to tell us more, I'm joined now by Paul Rogers, who's Open Democracy's international security expert. Good afternoon to you, Paul.
Hello, good afternoon.
So by branding the Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist group, what practically does that entail?
Basically, it sort of ratchets it up a bit. The Revolutionary Guard was already listed at a minor level, which basically made it much more difficult for people with any connection to travel into Canada. But this takes it a lot farther. It makes it much easier for the Canadians to look after any financial transactions and take them over, essentially. So it puts the screws on financial transactions primarily, but it is an upgrade rather than something entirely new. And it will have an impact. It'll be obviously quite an important country as far as Iran is concerned. Relations have not been good with Iran for many years. And in fact, I think the embassy was closed down 10 or 12 years ago. I think it's actually 14 years ago. So essentially, it's an upgrading. It's more potent than before, and it's something which the Conservative opposition in Ottawa have been wanting for quite a long time.
What's prompted them to make this announcement now?
Difficult to say. Obviously, I think it's the fourth anniversary of the key issue, which, of course, was the shooting down of a Ukraine Airlines plane after it took off from Tehran, UAPS 752. That had 175 passengers on board, but crucially, 55 of them were Canadian. So that had a very big impact in Canada. Now, the Iranians said from the start that it had been an accident, and in fact, there appeared to be a possibility of action being taken against some of the air traffic control personnel. And Iran has also offered a degree of compensation. But the Canadians and other countries basically say the kind of investigation that should have been done simply hasn't been done. And of course, there will be rumours that this wasn't an accident. And this, not long after the fourth anniversary of this, precisely why Canada has done it this time is difficult to say. It's been under heavy pressure, obviously from the United States, and also domestically. The group, the families of the people who were killed have long managed to campaign on this. And so something has tipped the balance. It's difficult to say what it is, but certainly it's something which is welcome to the opposition and to the people whose relatives were killed in the crash.
Tehran has described the move as unwise and unconventional and a politically motivated step. Tell us more about the grounds for that reaction, and indeed how angry this will make Iran.
I don't think it'll be a huge issue. The interesting thing, bluntly, is how it plays in the wider world. Obviously, Canada has done this. It's gone in with the United States. As far as I'm aware, it's not happened in many other Western countries, and there may be a possibility that this will encourage EU members to go likewise. But I'm not sure that will happen, because the reality is that while this is obviously very important internally for Canada, and Biden will be happy about this in the United States, one has to remember that Iran is viewed in very different ways in different parts of the world. And yes, it's absolutely true that there's an appalling human rights record, much of it at the feet of the Revolutionary Guard. But at the same time, many countries across the global south look at what Israel is doing with all its support from the likes of the United States, Canada, Britain, and the rest. So there's always a sense that, sauce for the goose and sauce for the gander. Why is it that, they're going very hard for Iran when, in fact, they have problems of their own and things to answer? Now, that is not something which would be accepted in most Western countries, but it plays in the wider world. And this, in a way, diminishes the impact of this particular move by the Canadians. But Canada is seen differently to the United States. It's quite surprising because Canada does have more of a sort of internationalist outlook. At least that's how it's viewed. Maybe not as much as 40 years ago, but certainly it is still there.
You mentioned a moment ago that it's not a huge issue that Canada has done this, which is probably not the nicest description of the Canada's reputation on the world stage. But in terms of the broader relationship between Iran and the West, how does this change things? Because, we've seen the nuclear deal fall to pieces. We have seen the Gaza-Hamas conflict divide and place Iran in a very, very difficult situation. So where does Iran sit now?
It sits now as a country that has much more influence than people perhaps expected. Obviously, it is highly significant as far as Hezbollah is concerned in southern Lebanon. Not that significant as far as Hamas is concerned. I think people rather overestimate that. But certainly as far as Hezbollah is concerned, then Iran is absolutely key. And of course, tensions are rising rapidly there. And there is talk, it's only talk at the moment, of Israel embarking on major military action in southern Lebanon. And that really would, I think, transform things as far as tensions across the Middle East. Gaza is bad enough, but if you actually find you're engaged in a major war in southern Lebanon, then that's much worse because inevitably, Israel knows full well that to engage in any kind of ground war with Hezbollah will be extremely costly. A war with Hezbollah would involve very heavy use of air power and a great deal of economic and social damage, even more so than happened in 2006. And they're very bitter members about that. So in that sense, there is the tension here. Now, what I said about Canada not ruling so highly on the world stage, that's true. But as I pointed out also, it has a slightly increased standing as far as the global south is concerned, certainly radical elements across the global south, than the United States. And so it really goes back to this point, will this have an impact on other Western countries? Will it increase the number of countries that are actually going to ratify the Revolutionary Guard as some sort of terrorist group? That's possible, but that may not happen immediately. But meanwhile, there are so many tensions and so much concern in Western security circles about an expansion of the war, because it's quite clear at the moment that Netanyahu is not prepared to settle. Hamas probably isn't prepared to settle either. And the risk of opening a new front may be attractive to the Netanyahu government, but is a considerable worry to many other countries, including ones across the West.
Paul Rogers, thank you as ever for joining us on Monocle Radio. The time here in London is 8 minutes past midday. You're listening to The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. It's time now to take a look at the rest of today's headlines. Here's Monocle's Carlotta Ribello.
Thanks, Emma. A Russian-American woman has gone on trial today for treason in Russia. Ksenia Karolina was arrested on a visit to Russia earlier this year and accused of raising funds for the Ukrainian army. If found guilty, she faces 12 years in prison. South Korea has said it will reconsider supplying weapons to Ukraine, the state agency Yonhap reports. The announcement from the presidential office comes after the leaders of North Korea and Russia signed a strategic military partnership. Seoul has condemned the agreement, saying it violated UN sanctions on North Korea. And the US military says a floating pier off Gaza will resume operations today, once again creating an additional path for humanitarian aid organizations to provide supplies. The maritime access route had been temporarily suspended for the past week due to poor weather conditions at sea. Those are today's headlines. Back to you, Emma.
Thank you, Carlotta. Now, today is World Refugee Day, and according to the latest Global Trends report from the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, there are now more than 120 million people across the globe who've been forcibly displaced as a result of persecution, conflict and human rights violations. To help solve the crisis, the agency wants governments and businesses to look for longer-term solutions and has been working with global companies like Ikea and Uniqlo to provide employment opportunities for refugees, from training programmes to actual jobs, in a bid to help with integration into society. Well, I'm delighted to say that I'm now joined on the line from Geneva by Kelly T. Clements, who's the UNHCR's Deputy High Commissioner. A very good afternoon to you, Kelly.
Very nice to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Could you just explain to us the scale of the problem? To say 120 million people, what does that actually look and feel like?
Yeah, it's first off, 120 million is really hard to get your mind around. These are individual people. They're families that have faced loss. It's conflict, it's war, violence, persecution, as you've mentioned. It's the equivalent size to Japan. And what we've seen for the last 12 years, unfortunately, is that the number of families that are forced to flee have increased in each progressive year. And there are a few things just to keep in mind. First, when people, basically make that terrible decision to have to pick up everything and move, and sometimes just to save their own lives, this can result, obviously, in massive trauma and impact on families, but also for those communities that then are hosting them and provide the immediate first support. And most of those families stay very close to home. They're either internally displaced in their own countries or they're in neighboring countries. And we see right now about 75% of the world's displaced are actually in low and middle income countries. And this is equivalent to about 1 in 69 people on the planet are forced to flee for the reasons we've just discussed.
You've been travelling in your capacity as the UNHCR's Deputy High Commissioner from your visits to the likes of Latin America and also to the likes of Chad. What kind of stories are you hearing from people? There are different types of stories that I hear. Obviously, there are the stories of loss and heartbreak, family members that may have perished, or children that can't sleep through the night because they've faced constant bombardment. But then when you're talking to families, there are very rare occasions where there isn't some hope that is also expressed. Families talking about putting their kids back in school, the potential for a better situation in the places that they find themselves, the generosity that they find in many host communities, that they're the first ones to receive them. They're thinking about the future. And that, of course, that kind of resilience, that strength, that they've faced just unspeakable violence, some of them, but they're still talking about rebuilding and they're still talking about, a better life for their children. So it is quite a world picture, if you will, in terms of what's happening in various parts of the globe. And I don't think we can talk about any part of the globe right now that isn't facing some of this crisis and conflict. And we've seen conflicts that go on for many, many years in places like Syria, for example, or Venezuela and Myanmar. And then you have, of course, fresh war, needless war in places like Sudan. And that where we've seen now 9 million people, almost 10, that have been forced to flee, most of them inside the country, but the vast majority of refugees now in neighboring countries that have generously hosted them. And the treatment of refugees has become, and the existence of refugees and the location of refugees have become issues which have become increasingly polarised and politicised. How does that complicate things?
Well, it complicates things because it takes the world's eye off of solutions, off of the political root causes, inequalities, things that have basically resulted in that movement of people. And rather than looking at refugees or displaced people as those that are symptoms of a problem, unfortunately, we see some politicians that are using them as the source of the problem. And that is a really it's not just a distraction, but it's a major impediment for us to see peace. Now, of course, as the UN Refugee Agency, we are not the peacemakers per se. Obviously, we look to the world leaders, member states, Security Council. We need much more peace in the world today. But we can also be looking at those people that are forced to flee, not as just people that maybe have immediate needs, and many of them do in these emergency situations. But very quickly, we should be looking at people who are forced to flee as, they have agency. They have skills. They have ambition. They want to be able to support themselves. Nobody sets out to be a refugee. They're put in that position because of other circumstances beyond their control. And time and time again, we see that if for example there are opportunities for livelihoods or jobs, putting kids in school immediately, we look increasingly at education as actually part of an emergency provision, not something that comes later. That's a form of protection for those children. That is a way that they can have a bit more semblance of normalcy, that they can deal with some of the psychosocial costs of war and so on. So all of this becomes very important. So you flip very much this rhetoric, this dangerous rhetoric, and look at refugees or those that are displaced as needing to include them because they can benefit a society, a community, and ultimately an economy.
Why have you chosen the private sector, companies like Ikea and Uniqlo, to ensure that economic and social agency that you discussed can actually come to fruition?
Well, several years ago, there was a compact that was adopted by the UN General Assembly, the Global Compact on Refugees. And what this document acknowledged is that it is not up just to governments or organizations like my own to respond to the needs of the displaced around the world, that it will take all of us, a whole of society approach, to look at issues about self-reliance, for example, including financially displaced populations in local and national services. And it also looked at displacement generally from, an empirical point of view, that this can actually bring up an economy of a society if people are really included. We have worked over the years, for example, with the International Financial Corporation, the private sector arm of the World Bank, and to do some data gathering that demonstrates that you can actually, if business invests, if refugees are included, if you're looking at a whole community as opposed to just segments of a community or just citizens of a particular community, then you've lost that opportunity for further growth. And there are parts of the world now, and I would go to Kenya is probably the most striking example at the moment, but not only, where private sector has invested, including in a refugee community called Kakuma, and extended and really put private sector investment in for jobs and livelihoods, some of the energy and climate work that's being done, financial inclusion, the ability for refugees to be able to work, own business, all of that becomes possible. And the Kenyan government has put together something called the Sharika Plan, which recognizes this fully, where you can actually see, an economic opportunity with the investment of the private sector and all of us in terms of being able to support those communities. So we've got some incredible private sector partners, strategic partners. They've been with us for many years. You mentioned a couple of them. We have many more, but they have acknowledged that this isn't just an opportunity to do good and to provide, for example, humanitarian aid and so on in these various circumstances that we're working in around the world, but they also recognize that it's good business. So employing refugees, which both companies that you've just mentioned do employ refugees, but also trying to use the expertise that they have to try to solve some of these big problems. I'll give you an example. IKEA has been a partner of ours for a dozen years in a place called Malkadida in Ethiopia, which is right on the Somalia border. And they've invested in an approach that basically allows refugees and Ethiopians a land, which is provided by the Ethiopian government, and an agricultural approach that includes energy components, education. And what's happening now is this community together is now sustaining themselves and including supporting others, drought victims in particular, and other displaced who have come more recently. But it's an approach that then develops a part of this country and is very much inclusive. And this is something that we're trying to replicate in other parts of the world as well.
Kelly T. Clements, UNHCR's Deputy High Commissioner, thank you so much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Today marks the start of campaigning for the race to become Tokyo's next governor. 2 women are in the lead to run the world's most populous city in what's the most crowded race in history for a Tokyo governor's election. There are 23 candidates standing. And I'm joined now by Tomohiko Taniguchi, who's former special advisor to the cabinet of Shinzo Abe and a regular voice here on Monocle Radio. Good afternoon, Tomohiko.
Good afternoon, Emma. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, I'm not going to give you the difficult task of naming every single of the 23 candidates, but could you just summarise who are the big players and the big names in this race, please?
It all boils down to 2 names, 2 female candidates, one incumbent, Yuriko Koike, and another, the best-known member of the Japanese largest opposition party. Ren Ho is her name. She's half Japanese and half Taiwanese.
The name that immediately springs to mind the thing that immediately springs to mind when you think of Yuriko Koike is that she led Tokyo through 2 of the most challenging periods in its history. Firstly, the COVID pandemic, and secondly, the Olympics. And what is her track record? How do people view her?
She's been in office for a long time, so there has been a degree of boredom, one has to admit. But she is still deemed to be very much a powerful candidate, so much so that Prime Minister Kishida's party, the ruling party of the Liberal Democrats, have failed to push their own candidate and have chosen to back Yuriko Koike. That indicates that Ms. Koike is still a powerful figure.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the fact that it's the governing Liberal Democrats who pushed her forwards, given the fact that many see that this as a sort of a more of a proxy dispute or proxy competition between the Liberal Democrats and the main opposition CDP.
Indeed, this can be very much a bellwether for the elections to come next year. Prime Minister Kishida has so far failed to grab an opportunity or two to dissolve Japanese parliament and call for snap elections. As things stand, the next year is going to be a big year because elections for both the lower and upper houses may likely happen. And Prime Minister Kishida's clout is not big. It's Prime Minister Kishida is losing his political weight. So people are viewing this election as very much a bellwether for the next year's elections.
Tell us about Renho Murata, commonly known, as you mentioned her as Renho. I mean, initial searches have her as a former swimsuit model. This is only a tiny proportion of her more serious story, isn't it?
There is a commonality between actually the 2 candidates that I mentioned, Ms. Koike, the current incumbent governor, and the challenger Renho. Both of these are from TV background. The job of TV celebrity, if you can call that a job, is the only noteworthy occupation that each one of these people experienced prior to entering politics. And so they are very much conscious about appearance as much as substance, and they are very much good at grabbing airtime and inch lengths.
Tell us a little bit more, though, about the most pressing needs that the city of Tokyo is facing at the moment. Indeed, Japan is really struggling with a demographic crisis. And also, for a long time, it has struggled to make sure that the role of women is prominent enough. The fact that now Tokyo is going to mainly be choosing between 2 women, how does that change things?
One has to put Tokyo into perspective. Its economy is bigger than most of the ASEAN economies. Indonesia's economy is the only country's economy bigger than Tokyo's output. Tokyo's output is bigger by 90% than London's, and Tokyo's budget itself is bigger than the national economies of Slovakia or Luxembourg. So it's a basket case of all sorts of problems, among which the declining birth rate below 1.0 is the most symbolic and challenging issue. And so these two female candidates are declaring that they are going to address these issues. And they very much are aware that both of these people are representatives of the female members of the society that have had very few representatives compared to other nations in the nation's politics.
So do you believe that having a woman in position in the top job in Tokyo could go some way to changing Japanese culture overall?
I think, like it or not, the visibility and the celebrity sort of status that Yuriko Koike has long dominated has been given an impetus to aspiring women. I say some like her and some do not like her, but like it or not, she's been at the center of Japanese politics for a long time. For instance, a Japanese, Japan English, cool biz, meaning that you must not wear suits and so on in the summer seasons, is the word that Koike coined.
Tomohiko Taniguchi, former special advisor to the cabinet of Shinzo Abe, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. Monocle's senior correspondent Fernanda Augusta Pacheco has been delving the charts for this week's Global Countdown. Faye, welcome.
Thank you. Very
Looking
good to
summary,
be here.
longest day of the year here in the United Kingdom, shortest shorts in the office.
And the sun is here finally. I'm so happy. Very
Me too.
happy.
Only for about 10 minutes, but let's not let that put us off. Where are we going today, Faye?
Sri Lanka. And
Excellent.
And you know what? It's very strange. I have a feeling it's the first time I'm doing Sri Lanka on the Global Countdown.
I wonder why.
I wonder why, but it's a fun top 5. I think you're going to enjoy.
Well, so when I have the choice, the pleasure of sitting in this chair and doing the Global Countdown with you, the songs generally fall into two categories. Firstly, memorable for perhaps the right reasons, sometimes the wrong, and utterly forgettable. Which category does Sri Lanka fall into this week?
Well, there will be a mix of ones. I wonder what you're going to think about number 5, because it is a hip-hop track, but I feel... You know, there's a little bit of social realism there. So it's not about boasting that you have a big car. I mean, the man, the singer, he's working in a construction camp. And one of the lines of the song is, "We feel the pain of another less and less." I wonder if it's even a social critique of Sri Lankan society, Emma.
Making it desperately deep. Thank you, Faye. This is apologies to anybody who is from Sri Lanka and who is listening with their ears half covered,
Yes.
as Faye and I try and say the names of these songs and these artists as bravely as we may. Sean Puta is a gentleman.
Shamputa and Dilo Beats as well. Don't forget about him. The
Never
song is
forget
called
about Dilo Beats.
Aiman Awe, which means why I came. I think it's quite atmospheric. I don't hate it. I actually think it's quite okay. I think it's a good song.
I love that. Damning with fake praise. I think it's quite okay. I don't hate it.
And I like the social critique there, as well.
So explain a little bit more about this. Apologies. Again, my language skills aren't what they could be. Where is the social critique in the song?
To be honest, I'm kind of guessing the
Okay.
social critique because he's a worker. He's in a construction place.
Well, he really is a worker.
He's wearing a hard hat.
Oh,
yes.
he's wearing a hard hat.
Yes, a hard hat. So I presume it's a social critique.
So this is genuinely a builder
Yeah.
making music.
Perhaps. And he's saying that he feels the pain of another less and less.
How much are you
So
making this up, Faye?
I'm making up a little bit, but but that's what videos are for. Sometimes you have to kind of deduct, because that's the only song I couldn't find properly the lyrics for Ayman Awe, which means why I came.
Filling in the gaps for us, Faye. Thank you. Number 4, where are you taking us with this one? Frankly, this is a voyage of discovery, I gather, from both of our points of view.
Exactly, but this one I did more research and there's more information available. So number 4...
Sorry, I've never had anyone on the radio who came on and said, actually, I haven't done my homework.
Number 4 is the soundtrack of a Sri Lankan musical called Visal Adare, which has been a massive hit in the Sri Lankan box office. And I'll tell you more about the film in a bit, but this is Yasas Medagedara with Mai Mal, which means May flowers.
Okay, so you've done your research. That's pleasant enough. You've done your research, so what can you share with us, Faye?
It is a very simple story. It's a romantic comedy, very gentle, So as you can see by the song by Yasas Medagara, it talks about two friends and, and their love life and tribulations. So even the lyrics of this track says, I want to be alone with you, even your sight brings a fragrance. So it's all very romantic, very gentle. And again, a big hit in the Sri Lankan box office. But Emma, not only Sri Lanka, the film is doing very well in Australia, New Zealand and Italy, which, according to my research, they have a very big Sri Lankan community in Europe. The second biggest, I believe, after the UK.
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Number 3.
Number 3, I think, is the only known Sri Lankan track here on the top 5. It's from India. The song's called Achacho, which I believe in Tamil means immutable, but it apparently has other feelings. It's kind of a very used word in Sri Lanka and in India as well, because it's Tamil, which is also spoken in Sri Lanka. This song is by Charisma Rai Chandran with Achacho. Let's have a listen.
Right, yes, anybody who's seen the video for this will understand very quickly why it is the 9th most watched video in the world at the moment.
Yes, there are a lot of dancers, wearing some very beautiful clothing. Lady dancers as well. And an amazing choreography.
With what my mum would describe as a significant global presence.
Of course. Emma, but you know that if you look at that video, in fact, the song's the soundtrack for a film called Aramanchi 4, which is the 4th installment of this horror comedy that is doing so well. But when you look at the video, it doesn't feel like a horror comedy. No. Maybe a little bit of comedy as well. And this franchise talks about a haunted...
Quite a lot of bikinis.
A lot of bikinis.
Well, sort of minimal costumes.
Which is good.
And it's the 4th installment of a horror comedy.
And it's doing so well. And apparently the story, I'll put it in very basic words. There's a haunted bungalow there and there's a revengeful ghost. But I have no idea how this song relates to the film. So I really want to watch this film now.
Oh,
I'm very curious,
the 4th installment of a haunted bungalow. What? This is what the world has been waiting for goodness sake.
I love it.
Thank you, Faye, for bringing this to us. That's number 3, Charisma. Look at the video and you'll see why it's really popular. Haunted bungalow notwithstanding. Number 2. Where are we now?
Interesting vibes. We looked, the beats were, I wouldn't say cheap, but there's a fun element to this song.
It is quite homemade, isn't it?
It is homemade, but people, can I be honest, Emma? Actually, if you listen to this, it reminds me of the Electro Braga scene in Brazil. It is a little bit homemade, but maybe there's a sense of humor in there, which could be interesting. I think our listeners should decide what they think of this.
Absolutely. Let's have a listen.
Manjila Sevandi with Akalanj Vana.
must say, at this point, I am now wondering why you have never done Sri Lankan music as a part of the top 5 before.
And I have to say, this song is from a label. This is the biggest music label in Sri Lanka, Desawana Music. They release so much stuff.
In that context, you'd think they'd give them a proper camera And maybe something a little bit more exotic than the local village hall.
People like this homemade
Okay.
beats, there's something to this. And again, it's humorous, but the lyrics are a bit romantic. Look at those eyes, feel my love, don't lie.
I love it when you say that, but in the video, it sounds she's grabbing the guy in quite a sort of weird way.
I should look at that again in
Yeah,
the video.
I would.
But
anyway, yes, sorry.
number one, I mean, you're talking bad things about the video, homemade. Number one is not
Oh
homemade.
no, they've got a budget for this one.
It's high budget.
There's at least 2 people in it.
There's a script, there's a mountain, there's a love affair
There's
going
a
on.
pen and pencil as well, which I'm a massive fan of.
Same, I love stationery.
We love a bit of stationary music videos.
There's always a connection.
He's singing and holding a pencil. I don't think I've ever seen that before.
And he's the biggest star in Sri Lanka. And he's a rapper, although this song, I wouldn't say is like a hip-hop track. I think it's more kind of a
I don't
ballad.
think it's a hip-hop track.
It's more of a ballad. It's Dulan ARX with Mandire Heda.
ගන්නන් කාලේ පස්සට ආයෙම යන්න මං අපේ අවසන් බර හමුව දාන මේ හිතේ තිබ්බ හැම දෙම එක ගානෙම නෑරම කියා ගන්න යෝන උනේ එක තමයි මේ වෑම මන්දිරේ හදේ.
Now, the video to this is him sort of saying stuff to her, pen in hand. One of the things that he says, and we have to thank the internet for translating this, so who knows. One of his lines is, I am a rude wasp. I'm not entirely sure what that is supposed to mean.
I'll tell you why. Because
Thank
it says, I am a rude wasp and you are a bunch of flowers. That was the second line. So that's beautiful and poetic. And he also says that love is the most beautiful mistake. You know what? I like Dulan.
I'm not sure if my other half turned around and said, this love is a beautiful mistake. I'm not entirely sure how I'd take it. And if he said he was a rude wasp, I'd wonder if the poor man had sort of had a bit too much sun. But rude wasp. Faye,
wasps need flowers to survive.
They do. Thank you. That was Monocle's Fernanda Augusta Pacheco with the Sri Lankan top 5. I asked you a question at the moment, at the beginning of this interview. Do we remember it for all the right reasons? Or does Sri Lanka go into the can't remember any of the songs I've just heard to category?
I got to be honest, I like the number one song. I think it's very romantic. I felt moved a little bit.
Monocle's Rude Wasp, Fernando Augusta Pacheco there. Thank you so much. And that's all the time that we have for today's briefing. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producer Carlotta Rebello. Our researcher was George Ruskin and our studio manager was Flynn Simons and Tamsin Howard. The briefing's back tomorrow at the same time. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.